SeaWorld is keeping a close eye on a killer whale blamed for killing a trainer.
In February 1991, the cheers at Sealand of the Pacific turned into screams. Keltie Byrne, a 20-year-old marine biology student and part-time trainer, slipped into the water during what should have been a routine show. Waiting below was Tilikum, a killer whale whose dark past was about to erupt in front of hundreds of stunned spectators. What followed was chaos.
She holds him down there for upwards to a minute as the other trainers around the pool's edge begin to realize that something has gone terribly wrong.
Life rings thrown, desperate shouts, and a young woman fighting to survive against 3 massive orcas. It was the first death linked to Tilikum, a tragedy that would expose the hidden dangers of captivity and ignite a controversy that still haunts SeaWorld today. The tragedy that shook Sealand forever. The afternoon of February 20th, 1991 began like any other at Sealand of the Pacific, a marine park in British Columbia. Families cheered, children leaned over the railings, and 3 orcas cut through the pool like shadows. Haida 2, Nootka 4, and a towering young male named Tilikum. Every leap, every splash was rehearsed to perfection. To the audience, it was magic. But beneath the surface, pressure had been building for years. And that day, the tension finally broke. Among the staff was Keltie Byrne, a 20-year-old marine biology student. She was strong, disciplined, and a natural swimmer, someone her co-workers trusted near the water. But as the show wrapped up, she made a single misstep. Her foot slipped, and she plunged into the pool. At first, no one panicked. Trainers fell in the water all the time, and Byrne was athletic enough to handle herself. But then the crowd saw it, the shadow rising beneath her. In seconds, one of the whales clamped onto her foot and yanked her under. Gasps rippled through the bleachers. To some, it almost looked like part of the act. To others, it looked like a nightmare. Byrne surfaced, thrashing for air. She tried to swim to safety, but each time she neared the edge, the orcas cut her off. Trainers hurled a life ring, screaming for her to grab it. She reached, desperate, but the whales batted it away. Eyewitnesses recalled her voice echoing through the arena. Screams swallowed by water, gasps silenced by splashes. What unfolded next was beyond anything the park had ever seen. The orcas didn't just attack, they toyed with her. They bounced her around the pool, one witness later said, describing how the whales shoved her, blocked her, and dragged her down like predators in the wild. Byrne resurfaced 3 times, each attempt weaker than the last, before the water finally closed over her for good. For nearly 2 hours, trainers tried to recover her body. They shouted commands, threw buckets of fish, even banged sticks against the pool walls. Nothing worked. The whales refused to release her, circling the tank with her lifeless body still in their grasp. Only when nets were lowered did they finally let go. The official report called it drowning. But eyewitnesses spoke of tooth marks, torn clothing, and the terrifying image of whales that killed, then refused to stop. The crowd left in stunned silence. A fun day at the park turned into something out of a horror film. Her death made headlines around the world, but the headlines never told the whole story. To know why this moment was so devastating, you have to know who Keltie Byrne was, and how her lifelong love of the sea placed her in Sealand's deadly arena. Keltie Byrne's path to Sealand. Before she became the name on every news headline, Keltie Byrne was simply a young woman chasing a dream. She grew up in Courtenay, a small town on Vancouver Island. Life there was steady and simple, but Keltie always felt her compass pointed somewhere larger than the main street she walked each day. From the beginning, she was drawn to water. Her parents remembered afternoons when she'd comb the rocky shoreline, arranging kelp, shells, and driftwood into little collections she guarded like treasures. To her, these weren't just trinkets. They were fragments of a world she longed to understand. In high school, her fascination became a passion. She was a competitive swimmer, gliding through water with the kind of discipline that left even her coaches impressed. Friends joked that she was part fish. Teachers noted how she balanced early morning practices with top grades. And while her classmates daydreamed about traveling to big cities, Keltie daydreamed about the ocean, about dolphins, whales, and the mysteries beneath the waves. She proudly carried marine life field guides, sometimes doodling orcas in the margins of her notebooks. To those who knew her, it was obvious. She wasn't just interested in the ocean, she belonged to it. That passion carried her into the University of Victoria, where she enrolled in marine biology. She thrived in lectures but found the classrooms stifling. Chalk dust didn't compare to sea spray. She wanted salt in the air, not textbooks in her hands. When she heard about part-time openings at Sealand of the Pacific, she knew immediately she had to apply. Here was her chance to get closer to the creatures she had admired since childhood. At first, her work at Sealand was anything but glamorous. She started as an assistant, carrying buckets, cleaning platforms, and recording water temperatures and salinity levels. It was the kind of routine most students would find tedious, but not Keltie. She threw herself into the details, eager to learn. Her attentiveness didn't go unnoticed. Senior trainers soon trusted her with more responsibilities, like helping during rehearsals, and even tossing fish to the whales after successful behaviors. In time, she began standing on the platform during shows, her calm presence helping guide the animals as senior trainers explained routines to the audience. Each small step thrilled her. She was no longer just a student reading about marine mammals in a textbook. She was standing beside them, feeling the spray of their breath, hearing the deep, echoing calls reverberate through the water. By early 1991, Keltie had become part of the rhythm of Sealand. At just 20 years old, she was balancing her coursework with long hours at the park, carrying herself with quiet confidence that made others believe she was destined for something greater. To her colleagues, she wasn't just another student worker. She was someone who genuinely belonged around the animals. But behind that growing confidence was also risk. Sealand was no ordinary job, and the orcas were not ordinary animals. While the crowds clapped at every splash, staff knew the truth. The whales were unpredictable, sometimes aggressive, and always dangerous. Keltie, with her natural grace and passion, made it look effortless. But every day she worked at Sealand, she was stepping into an environment built on control, pressure, and risk. And on that February afternoon, her dream collided with that reality. The same drive that had carried her from the shores of Courtenay to the platforms of Sealand now placed her in the center of a tragedy. Her life, so full of promise, was cut short in seconds. And yet, the story didn't end with her. It became the beginning of a reckoning. The aftermath of Keltie's death rippled far beyond that pool. Sealand of the Pacific, once a popular family attraction, suddenly found itself under a shadow it could not escape. Newspapers across Canada and beyond carried the story, their headlines filled with words like attack and tragedy. Families who once brought their children to cheer at the shows now hesitated, unsettled by the thought that the carefully choreographed performances might hide danger beneath the surface. Behind the scenes, trainers and staff were shaken to their core. Many had seen the orca's unpredictable behavior before, but nothing had prepared them for the sight of one of their own being dragged under while powerless to help. Whispers grew louder in the weeks that followed, about safety, about responsibility, and about whether Sealand could ever recover its reputation. By the fall of 1991, the whispers had become unavoidable. Attendance had dropped, the public's trust was shattered, and the park's owners faced a truth they could no longer ignore. Sealand's image as a place of wonder had collapsed in a single afternoon. With mounting pressure, the decision was made. Sealand of the Pacific would close. Its legacy, once built on entertainment and awe, was now forever marked by tragedy. For those closest to Keltie, the closure was no comfort. She had been a daughter, a sister, a friend, a student with a bright future, someone who wanted nothing more than to devote her life to the ocean she loved. Her story became a symbol, a reminder that the cost of chasing wonder could be devastating. But that tragedy didn't just end Keltie Byrne's life. It exposed cracks in the facade of marine entertainment. And at the center of it all was one whale, Tilikum. The whale who rebelled. To really understand why an apparently tamed killer whale decided to attack its own trainer, you have to go back to 1983, to the frigid waters of Iceland. Fishermen dropped a massive net into Barufjordur Fjord and captured a 2-year-old orca calf. The pod panicked, thrashing against the ropes, their high-pitched calls echoing through the water. Mothers circled helplessly as the young male was torn away forever. That calf would be given the name Tilikum, a word from the Chinook jargon of the Pacific Northwest that meant friends. But for him, that name became a cruel irony, because his life would be defined by anything but friendship. His first stop was the Hafnarfjordur Marine Zoo, where he was kept in a tank so small that he could only swim a few strokes before hitting the concrete. A creature born to roam hundreds of miles each day was now pacing in circles, his world reduced to the size of a puddle. And for nearly a year, he endured this isolation before being sold again, shipped across the Atlantic to a marine park in Canada, Sealand of the Pacific. But what awaited him there was worse. At first glance, Sealand appeared to be a paradise. Families flocked to see its performing orcas, clapping at every leap and splash. But for Tilikum, it was another prison, one that introduced new torments. Two older females, Haida, 2, and Nootka, 4, already dominated the pool. Both were pregnant. Both were aggressive. Trainers and staff frequently saw the females rake their teeth across Tilikum's skin, leaving bloody scratches that sometimes covered his body. In the hierarchy of captive orcas, Tilikum was at the bottom. When the aggression became unbearable, trainers forced him into a medical pool, a tiny, barren chamber barely larger than his body. There he floated for hours, sometimes motionless, waiting until it was safe to return to the main tank. Imagine a predator that in the wild would dive thousands of feet and travel hundreds of miles, reduced to drifting in a bathtub. The confinement carved into him like a wound. And then there was the relentless schedule. Sealand demanded up to 8 shows a day, 7 days a week. If the whales performed incorrectly, food was withheld until they repeated the routine. It was classical conditioning, punishment by hunger. Trainers cheered when the animals splashed the front rows, but behind the glass, resentment simmered. Over time, Tilikum developed stomach ulcers, a physical sign of the stress eating him alive. Yet to the public, none of this was visible. Audiences saw splashes, smiles, and perfectly timed tricks. The dark reality, bullying, isolation, starvation, remained hidden behind the glass. For Tilikum, the world had become a concrete prison. He was trapped between hostile females, confined in spaces no ocean predator should ever know, and forced into performance after performance. Trainers described him as restless and unpredictable, sometimes unresponsive to commands, sometimes lashing out in ways that seemed out of character for a creature branded as gentle by 1991. He had spent nearly a decade under these conditions. To the trainers, he was still just another performer. To the audience, he was a star. But inside that enormous body was a storm. So by the time Keltie Byrne slipped into the pool in 1991, Tilikum had already endured nearly a decade of confinement, violence, and fear. The tragedy that unfolded wasn't born in a single moment. It was the inevitable outcome of years of captivity, pressure, and control. And Sealand wasn't the only one watching. The aftermath of Byrne's death would expose cracks in the entire industry, and it would set the stage for a transfer that would turn Tilikum into the most infamous killer whale in history. Keltie Byrne's life was cut short in seconds, but her death exposed a truth that could no longer be ignored. Behind the applause and bright lights, Tilikum's life was one of confinement and frustration, a warning of what happens when wild strength is caged for human amusement. But his story was not unique. From dolphins in concrete pools to elephants paraded in circuses to lions and tigers pacing behind steel bars, the pattern repeats itself. Keltie's fate and Tilikum's torment remind us that entertainment built on captivity comes at a terrible cost, and it is a reckoning that reaches far beyond one pool in British Columbia. So, what do you think? Was Tilikum's story a tragic exception, or proof that captivity itself is the real danger? And should animals like orcas, lions, and elephants ever be kept for entertainment? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more untold stories. Thanks for watching.